I returned to visit my wife unexpectedly and found her sleeping on the doormat, wearing torn old clothes like a stray animal. My son-in-law came out laughing, used her shoulder to clean the mud from his designer shoes, and waved off his guests, "Just the crazy maid, nothing to concern yourselves with." No screaming from me, no swinging fists. One step forward was all it took, and whatever they saw behind my eyes killed the music dead because not one of them had the first clue who they were dealing with. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories, where the truth has a way of finding its moment no matter how long it takes. If stories like this one speak to something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd follow along and subscribe. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me when someone treats the people you love as less than human. Do you think patience or power is the more dangerous weapon? I'd love to hear where your mind goes. A note before we start: some elements of this story have been shaped for dramatic storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. It's the truth at the heart of it that matters. My name is Walter Beaumont. To the people on my street, and even to my own daughter, I am just a retired truck driver who spent 40 years hauling freight across America's interstates. They look at my calloused hands, my faded canvas work shirts, my plain way of talking, and figure I am just another old man getting by on a pension. They do not know the truth. They do not know that I own the trucking company. They do not know that I own the logistics firm that acquired it. They do not know that 2 weeks ago I was in Zurich, closing the sale of a European shipping subsidiary for 9 figures. I spent a lifetime building an empire from the shadows because I needed to know who loved me for me and who loved me for my money. I had been in Europe for 2 months working the merger. I missed my wife, Dorothea. We have been married for 45 years. She is the only person alive who knows the true scale of what we have built, and yet she is a woman of the plainest tastes. She loves her garden. She loves to knit. She cannot stand ostentation. When our daughter Claudia married Preston, a man whose ambition was carved right into his face, Dorothea and I decided to give them a hand. I purchased a sprawling estate in Lake Forest, Illinois, through a blind trust. I let them live there, no rent, no strings. I covered every renovation. I even worked behind the scenes to land Preston his CFO position at a mid-sized tech firm, though he is convinced he earned it on pure merit. All we asked in return was the use of the guest cottage when we visited, and that they look after Dorothea while I was away on these long stretches of travel. Dorothea had undergone hip surgery right before I left. She needed rest. She needed someone to care for her. I trusted my daughter. I even trusted that a man as calculating as Preston would have the basic decency to treat his mother-in-law with dignity. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night in November when my flight touched down at O'Hare. I decided not to call ahead. I wanted to surprise Dorothea. I wanted to see her face when I walked through the door 2 weeks early. It was raining, a cold, biting rain that cut straight through to the bone. I took an Uber to Lake Forest. As the car rolled through those manicured streets of the wealthy suburbs, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I have always trusted my gut. It kept me alive in business for 4 decades. And right then, it was telling me something was very wrong. The driver pulled up to the iron gates of the estate. They were standing open. The long driveway was crowded with luxury cars, Mercedes BMWs, a handful of Porsches. I frowned. Claudia had not said a word about any party. I paid, the driver grabbed my canvas travel bag, and stood there in the downpour staring up at the house I had paid for. It blazed with light. Music pulsed from inside a chamber music playlist that screamed pretension. Figures shifted behind the curtains. A cocktail party. I walked the driveway with the rain plastering my hair flat against my forehead. I must have looked like a vagrant, an old man with a limp and a cheap bag making his way toward a mansion. I reached the massive oak front doors and was about to ring the bell when something on the porch stopped me cold. Off to the left of the door, pushed back into the shadows beyond the reach of the sconce light, sat a heap of gray rags. It looked like someone had dumped a bundle of old laundry out in the wet air. Then the bundle shivered. I froze. I dropped my bag. I moved closer, my heart slamming against my ribs like something caged. It was not laundry. It was a person. A small, frail person curled tight in a fetal position on a thin, filthy mat. She wore a gray uniform 2 sizes too large, torn at the hem. Her hair, which she usually kept, dyed a soft brown, had gone fully gray and was matted with dirt. Her hands were red and cracked raw from the cold. Dorothea. My legs nearly buckled. This was my wife. This was the woman who had stood beside me when I was a nobody with 1 truck and a mountain of debt. She was sleeping on the porch like a stray animal. Dorothea. I whispered. She did not stir. She was muttering something under her breath, shivering hard, as the wind drove the rain across the porch. I reached out to touch her, and the front door swung open. Laughter poured out loud and careless. A wave of warmth rolled over me, carrying expensive perfume and the smell of hors d'oeuvres. I stepped back into the dark on instinct. Preston came through the door. His tuxedo fit him the way only a custom tuxedo fits. He held a crystal tumbler of bourbon in one hand. On either side of him were 2 men I half recognized from business magazines, investors he had been chasing for months. Gentlemen, even on a night like this, the grounds are worth seeing. Preston said, that oiled charm of his working smoothly on anyone with a net worth that interested him. He stepped forward and then stopped. He looked down at Dorothea. His face registered no surprise, no concern, just irritation. Dorothea stirred. The noise pulled her awake. She scrambled to sit up, her eyes wide with fear. She looked disoriented, her movements stiff and jerky from the cold and the hip surgery she had never properly recovered from. "I am sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice thin and scraped hollow. "I was just resting my eyes. I will clean it up right now, sir. Sir." She was calling our son-in-law sir. Preston laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. He glanced at the 2 investors. "Gentlemen, my apologies," he said, gesturing toward my wife with his glass. "Good household staff is nearly impossible to find anymore. This is our live-in maid. She is not quite right up here, if I am being honest. We keep her on out of the kindness of our hearts, but she has this habit of sleeping out here. Fancies herself some kind of guard dog." One of the investors gave a nervous chuckle. "A bit of an eccentric, is she?" "You have absolutely no idea," Preston said. Then he did something that turned the world red. He glanced down at his patent leather dress shoes. There was a smear of mud on the toe of the right one. He looked at Dorothea, who was struggling to push herself up against the brick wall. He extended his foot. He set his shoe against the shoulder of her torn gray dress, and he wiped it. He ground the mud from his sole into the fabric of my wife's clothing, while she flinched and dropped her head. "Stand up straight when we have guests, you crazy old hag." Preston hissed the words through a smile kept carefully in place for the investors. "You are embarrassing this household." That was the moment the old Walter Beaumont, the patient, careful businessman, ceased to exist. The man who took his place was something far colder and far more dangerous. I stepped out of the shadows. "That is enough." My voice was not raised, but it sliced through the rain and the music like a blade. Preston startled. He spun around and sloshed bourbon over the rim of his glass. The investors looked me over, wet canvas work shirt, canvas travel bag, with open distaste. "Who the hell are you?" one of them demanded. Preston stared at me. His eyes went narrow, not afraid, disgusted. Well, wonderful, Preston sneered. Now the evening is truly complete. Gentlemen, this is the other charity case I mentioned. My father-in-law, the truck driver. He put a curl of contempt on the words truck driver, as though naming a disease. I did not answer him. I walked straight past and drove my shoulder into his, hard enough to knock him back a step. I knelt down beside Dorothea. "Dot," I said, keeping my voice soft. "It is me. It is Walt." She looked up at me. Her eyes were glazed, the pupils blown wide. She was looking at me, but she was not seeing me. She flinched from my outstretched hand. "No, no, I did not break the vase," she whimpered. "Please do not lock me in the basement again. I will be good. I promise I will be good." Basement. A sharp physical pain drove through my chest. They had been locking her in the basement. They had frightened her so completely that she could no longer recognize her own husband. I took her hands gently. They were ice cold. I pulled off my heavy coat and drew it around her shoulders. Behind me, Preston collected himself. He stepped forward, positioning himself above us. "Would you look at this?" he said to his guests with a slow shake of his head. "Senility runs right through the family. Walter, get her out of here. You are ruining my evening. Take her around to the servants' entrance where she belongs." I got to my feet. I helped Dorothea stand bearing her weight because her bad hip was clearly failing her. Then I turned to face Preston. Rain dripped from the brim of my hat. "You just wiped your shoes on my wife?" I said. Preston rolled his eyes. "She is a maid, Walt, and a poor excuse for one at that. She spills more than she cleans. Honestly, we should have placed her in a state home months ago, but Claudia has a soft spot for strays." "You called her a maid," I said again. "You told these men she is your servant." "Because she is—" Preston snapped, his composure cracking. "Have a look around you, Walter. This estate runs $50,000 a month to maintain. Who do you think covers that? Me. I am the CFO. I bring home the money. You two are leeches. You live in my guest cottage. So yes, if she wants a roof over her head, she earns it. She scrubs the floors. She does the laundry. And if she acts crazy, she sleeps on the mat. That is the rule." He moved in close, his breath thick with expensive bourbon and something rotten underneath. Now take your crazy wife and get off my porch before I call security and have you both thrown into the street. I have important people here." I looked at the two investors. They were watching the scene with morbid curiosity, and not one of them said a word. They were complicit in that silence. I looked at Preston. I studied his face. I memorized the arrogance in his jaw and the cruelty sitting in his eyes. I wanted to hold that image him at the absolute peak of his power. I gave a slow nod. "All right, Preston," I said. "We will go." He smirked. "Good. Finally a moment of clarity." "Go on then. Scram." I tightened my arm around Dorothea. I walked her down the steps, past the row of luxury cars, and into the rain. I did not go to the guest cottage. I did not go to the back. I walked straight down the length of that driveway toward the iron gate. "Where are you going?" Preston called after me, a thread of confusion working into his voice. "The servants' quarters are that way." I kept walking without a glance back. I pulled out my phone and called the Uber driver who had dropped me off. He had not made it far. We waited at the gate in the pouring rain. Dorothea was shaking violently against my side. "Walt!" She whispered it, a sliver of clarity cutting through the fog. "Is that you?" "Yes, honey," I said, swallowing back the tears. "It is me." "I am so hungry, Walt," she said. "They only give me the scraps from the dinner parties." They say I do not deserve fresh food because I broke a plate. I pulled her closer. The rage in my gut was hot and white, burning clean, like a fuel I had not touched in years. It was the same fire that had driven me to buy my first truck when the bank laughed in my face. The same fire that made me grind my competitors to dust when they tried to push me out of the market. The Uber pulled up. I opened the door and got Dorothea inside. The warmth of the car wrapped around us. "Where to?" the driver asked, eyeing Dorothea's condition with quiet concern. "The Peninsula, Chicago," I said. "The presidential suite." He raised an eyebrow, but put it in gear. As we pulled away, I took one last look back at the mansion. Preston was laughing with his guests, pulling the heavy door shut, sealing himself inside against the storm. He believed he had won. He thought he had taken out the trash. He had no idea he had just declared war on the man who owned the company that signed his paychecks. He had no idea that the house he was standing in was legally mine. He had no idea that the car he drove, the suit on his back, and every plate of food on his table had been paid for by the man he had just called a leech. I took Dorothea's cold hand in mine. "You are safe now, Dot," I whispered. "And I promise you, by the time I am finished with him, he will wish he had never been born." We reached the hotel an hour later. The staff knew me. They did not flinch at my soaked clothes or the state my wife was in. They saw the black titanium card in my hand, and they moved mountains. Within minutes, we were in a suite that cost more per night than Preston earned in a month. I ordered room service, broth, warm rolls, chamomile, everything soft and comforting. I drew a hot bath. I helped Dorothea out of that degrading maid's uniform. When I saw her body, I broke. She was skin and bone. Her ribs pressed through her pale skin. But worse than that were the bruises, yellow and purple marks on her arms, the kind left by hands that grabbed too hard. A nasty welt across her shin, and the look in her eyes haunted skittish, the look of a prisoner of war, not a beloved grandmother. I washed her hair, slowly rinsing away the dirt and the neglect. She fell asleep in the bath, worn completely through. I carried her to the bed and tucked her into sheets with a thread count fit for royalty. I sat in the armchair in the corner of the dark room and listened to her breathe. I did not sleep. I took out my phone. It was 3:00 a.m., but I dialed a number I knew would be picked up. Alfred Crane, my personal attorney, and the most ruthless legal mind in Chicago. Walter. Alfred's voice was groggy but alert. "It is 3:00 a.m. Is everything all right?" "No, Alfred," I said. "Nothing is all right." I told him everything. The doormat, the uniform, the insults, the physical abuse, the basement. Silence settled over the line. Then I heard the click of a lamp and the rustle of sheets. "I am heading to the office," Alfred said. "What do you want to do?" "I want to destroy him, Alfred. I want to take it all. The house, the car, the job, the reputation. I want him to have nothing. I want him to feel exactly as small and helpless as he made my wife feel tonight." "Consider it done," Alfred said. "But Walter, we need to be smart. We need proof. We need to understand exactly how deep this rot goes. If they were drugging her or starving her, we need medical documentation. I'm taking her to Dr. Henley at Northwestern Memorial Hospital first thing in the morning," I said. "He is an old friend. He will keep it quiet." "Good. And Walter, what about Claudia?" The question hung there. My daughter. My only child. She had been living in that house. She had to have seen. She had to have known her mother was sleeping on a filthy mat and chosen to do nothing. I looked at Dorothea, sleeping fitfully across the room. If she stood by and let this happen, I said, my voice going flat and cold, then she is not my daughter anymore. She is just another target. I hung up. I crossed to the window and looked out over the city lights. The rain had stopped. But the storm was only just beginning. The next morning, sunlight broke across the skyline, though it carried no warmth. I arranged a private car to take us to the private hospital wing. Dorothea was awake but withdrawn, quiet. She kept running her fingers over the silk sheets as though she could not quite believe they were real. Dr. Henley met us at the private entrance. He took one look at Dorothea, and his professional composure slipped right off his face. "My God, Walter," he said quietly. "What happened to her?" "Examine her ray," I said. "I need a full toxicology screen, a nutritional panel, everything documented, photographs of every bruise, all of it." While the nurses took Dorothea for scans, I stepped into the hallway and dialed Claudia. 4 rings. "Hello." Her voice was tired and edged with anxiety. "Claudia, it is Dad. Dad Ristud, oh my God, where are you? Preston said you came back last night and caused a scene. He said you dragged Mom out into the storm. He is furious, Dad. He says you embarrassed him in front of the investors. You need to bring Mom back right now and apologize." I closed my eyes. Not a word of concern for her mother. No question about whether she was cold or hungry, only worry about Preston's wounded pride. "Is that what he said?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Yes, he said Mom was having one of her episodes and you just enabled her. Dad, you know she needs structure. She needs to be managed. Preston says if you bring her back by noon, he might let you stay in the cottage, but you have to follow his rules." "Structure," I said. "Is that what you call sleeping on a doormat? Is that what you call starving her?" She went quiet. "Dad, you do not understand. She gets messy. She spills things. Preston has expensive rugs. It is just easier if she stays outside sometimes. It is not like she minds. She thinks it is a game. She thinks it is a game because she is terrified, Claudia. Look, Dad, I cannot deal with this right now. Preston is on a rampage. Just bring her back, please, for my sake. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. For your sake." I understood in that moment that my daughter was lost. She had been swallowed whole by her husband's narcissism. Or perhaps she had always been this fragile, and I had simply been too blind to see it. She was an accomplice. She had watched her mother, the woman who sat up through her fevers, the woman who wrote the checks for her college education, be treated like an animal, and she had excused it to protect his rugs. "I will not be bringing her back." "Claudia," I said. "What are you going to do? You have no money, Dad. Where will you go? A shelter. You cannot manage her care. You are old. You are broke." I drew a slow breath. "I am coming to the house on Saturday," I said. "Saturday. What for?" "To settle things. Tell Preston I will be there." I hung up before she could say another word. Dr. Henley came out of the examination room. He was holding a clipboard, his knuckles bloodless against it. "Walter, come into my office." We sat down. He set the file on the desk between us. "She is severely malnourished, Walter. She has lost 30 lb in 2 months. She is dehydrated, but that is not the worst of it." "What is?" We ran the tox screen. "Her blood is loaded with haloperidol and benzodiazepines. High doses, far above any therapeutic range." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means they were drugging her, Walter. These are powerful antipsychotics. They are used for severe schizophrenia or to sedate violent patients in psychiatric wards. Given to an elderly woman with no history of psychosis, they produce confusion, memory loss, lethargy, and compliance. It mimics dementia. They were chemically lobotomizing her." The room seemed to tilt. They were not merely neglecting her. They were poisoning her. Manufacturing the appearance of madness so they could bend her to their will. Why? I asked the word, barely audible. Huh? Why would they do that? To strip her of credibility, Henley said. A dementia diagnosis costs her legal standing. She cannot make decisions. She cannot testify. And what? It makes it very straightforward to have someone committed to a state facility against their wishes. The anger that had been smoldering since the night before surged into something total, like a furnace door thrown open. They were going to lock her away, discard her in some institution so they could enjoy the estate without the inconvenience of her being alive in it. "Thank you, Ray," I said, getting to my feet. "I need all the records." I walked out of the hospital and called Alfred. "Alfred," I said, "change of plans. We are not just taking the house." "What do you mean?" "I want to know where the money went. I set up a trust for them. I gave them access to an emergency fund for medical expenses. Find out what they did with it." "Already on it," Alfred said. "I pulled the logs this morning." "Walter, it is bad. Tell me." Preston forged Dorothea's signature. He drained the emergency fund 3 months ago. $200,000. What did he spend it on? Medical equipment? Home care? No. He bought a Porsche 911 GT3, and he put a deposit down on a vacation home in Harbor Country. He had stolen my wife's money to buy a sports car. "All right," I said. "Listen carefully, Alfred. I want you to buy his debt." "His debt?" "Yes, all of it. His credit cards, his car loans, his student loans, if any remain. Buy them all. Use the shell company. Make us his only creditor." "Done." "What else? Find out who his direct boss is. The CEO of the tech firm." "That is straightforward. It is Global Tech Solutions. The CEO is Gordon Ashby." I started laughing. It was a cold, hollow sound. "Gordon Ashby." "Yes, you know him." "Know him. Alfred Global Tech is a subsidiary of Trident Holdings." "I know," Alfred said. "And you own Trident Holdings." "Exactly. Get Gordon on the phone. Tell him the chairman of the board is coming to dinner on Saturday. And tell him to bring the security footage from the Lake Forest house. The estate belongs to the which means the security system belongs to me. I want every second of recording from the last 6 months." "Understood," Alfred said. "Saturday is going to be a bloodbath." "It is not going to be a bloodbath, Alfred," I said, gazing out at the city skyline. "It is going to be an eviction." I spent the next 3 days in silence. I switched off my phone. I let them stew. I let Preston believe he had won, that I was hiding in some cheap motel, afraid to confront him. I let him send threatening texts about cutting off our health insurance, about calling the police to report a kidnapping. I let him dig himself deeper with every message. I focused on Dorothea. With proper fluids and food and the toxic drugs finally clearing her system, she began returning to me. The fog lifted. Memories surfaced. She remembered the insults. She remembered Claudia watching television while Preston screamed at her. She cried a great deal, but she was strong. On Friday, I took her shopping. Not to a department store. I took her to a private atelier on the Magnificent Mile. I bought her a gown of deep sapphire velvet, hand-tailored. I bought her diamonds, a necklace that cost more than Preston's stolen Porsche. I brought in a stylist for her hair and makeup. I fitted myself in a tuxedo. I trimmed my beard. Standing before the mirror, I did not see a truck driver anymore. I saw the man who had built the empire. Saturday evening came. It was the night of Preston's promotion party. He had told me weeks before that he was hosting the board of directors. to celebrate his expected elevation to CEO. He believed himself untouchable. We took the helicopter from Chicago to a private airfield near Lake Forest. A Bentley Mulsanne was waiting at the tarmac. As we rolled up to the estate gate, the security guard, a hired contractor, moved to wave us off. Then he saw the car. He saw me in the back. He swung the gate open without a word. We came up the long driveway. The house blazed with light. The party was well underway. Glasses clinked, and the low murmur of expensive conversation drifted out across the grounds. The car eased to a stop at the front steps. The same steps where my wife had been sleeping on a mat 4 days ago. I took Dorothea's hand. "Are you ready, my love?" She looked at the house. She looked down at her diamond bracelet. She looked at me. Her eyes were clear and fierce. "Well, let's go take out the trash, Walter." The chauffeur opened the door. We stepped out. I offered her my arm. We climbed the steps. The front door stood open. We walked into the foyer. The chatter fell away instantly. The music seemed to thin to nothing. Preston was holding court in the center of the room, a glass of champagne raised, surrounded by his bosses. He looked up. His jaw went slack. He did not see a beggar. He did not see a truck driver. He saw a man in a $10,000 suit standing beside a woman who looked like a queen. "Walter," he stammered. Whose car is that? Did you steal it?" I smiled. It was a wolf's smile. "Hello, Preston," I said. "I believe you have something of mine." And the room fell into a silence so complete it had weight. The quiet of the private medical suite pressed down harder than the storm I had walked through 4 nights before. I sat in a leather chair that had cost more than my first truck, staring at the closed door behind which my wife lay. The only sound was the measured beep of a heart monitor, proof that Dorothea was still with me, though barely. Every beep felt like a clock I did not know how to stop. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. These same hands had wrestled 18-wheelers through blizzards in the Rockies and signed merger documents worth millions in boardrooms in Tokyo. Yet here they trembled without any control. I kept seeing her on that mat. The way she flinched when I reached for her. The way she addressed our son-in-law as Sir. The door opened. It was not a nurse. It was Dr. Raymond Henley, Chief of Internal Medicine at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and the only man outside of my attorney I would trust with my life. We had played poker together for 20 years. I knew his tells when he was bluffing. He was not bluffing now. He looked as though he had walked in from somewhere terrible. He did not take his seat behind the desk. He pulled a chair directly in front of mine, his knees nearly meeting mine. A thick file rested in his hands, his knuckles pale against the manila folder. He did not speak for a long time. He removed his glasses and pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose, a gesture of bone-deep exhaustion, and I saw with a cold jolt that it was also something close to rage. "Walter." His voice was low, stripped of its usual warmth. "I have known you and Dorothea for a long time. I have treated heads of state, celebrities, royalty. But what I am reading in this file," he trailed off and dropped the folder onto the small table between us. It landed with a heavy thud that rang through the quiet room. "Tell me, Ray," I said, my voice scraped rough. "Do not soften it. Is she dying?" "Not anymore." He said the words clipped and sharp. But she was headed there, and not by natural causes. He opened the file and pointed to a series of charts and graphs that read like a foreign language to me. "Start with the physical exam," he said. "Dorothea weighs 98 kg. Walter, when I last saw her 6 months ago, she was a healthy 130. She has shed nearly 25% of her body mass. That is not missing a few dinners. That is starvation. Starvation. The word sat between us, ugly and blunt. Her electrolyte levels are critical. He went on, tracing a red line across the page. She is severely dehydrated. Her skin turgor is non-existent. But that is only the surface. We found evidence of healed fractures in her fingers never properly set. Pressure sores on her heels and lower back, the type we typically see in patients who are immobile and abandoned in substandard nursing homes. She has been kept from moving, likely confined in a small space for long stretches. The bile climbed in my throat. I gripped the chair arms hard enough to make the leather creak. They had taken my wife, a woman who loved to dance, who found peace walking through her garden, planting lavender, and turned her into a prisoner. But that is not why I brought you in here, Ray said, his voice dropping lower still. What I just described is neglect. What I found in her blood work, that is assault. He turned the page to a toxicology report. Several columns were flagged in harsh red ink. We ran a full panel because of the confusion and the dilated pupils you described, he explained. Walter, Dorothea is not senile. She is not developing early-onset dementia or Alzheimer's. Her brain scans are clean. There is no atrophy consistent with either disease. Then why? I whispered. Why didn't she know me? Why was she speaking nonsense? Because she is toxic, Ray said. Her blood is saturated with a combination of heavy sedatives and antipsychotics. He put his finger on the first flagged entry. Haldol, a potent antipsychotic used in cases of severe schizophrenia or acute mania. It is a chemical restraint, Walter. In high doses, particularly in elderly patients, it produces extreme confusion, memory loss, loss of motor control, and profound lethargy. His finger moved down the column. Benzodiazepines, at 3 times the maximum therapeutic dose. Together, this combination induces a state of twilight anesthesia. The patient is technically awake, but essentially absent, suggestible, terrified, and unable to retain new memories. It replicates the presentation of advanced dementia with near-perfect accuracy. I stared at the page, the letters dissolving in front of me. They were drugging her, I said. The recognition arrived like something physical, not just neglect. Poison. Ray gave a slow, grim nod. This was no accident, Walter. You do not accidentally consume these precise drugs in these precise quantities. This was a regimen, a calculated daily protocol designed to keep her confused, passive, and controllable. They were chemically lobotomizing her. Why? I asked, even though the part of me that had spent a lifetime reading people already knew. To strip her of credibility, Ray said, giving voice to my darkest suspicions. If she appears demented, if she is ruled incompetent, she loses all legal standing. She cannot control her assets. She cannot appear in court. She becomes entirely subject to her guardians. I got to my feet. I could not stay seated. I moved to the window and looked out at the skyline. But what I was really seeing was Preston's smirk. My daughter Claudia standing by while her husband dissolved poison into her mother's food. They stole her mind, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it burned clean. They could not simply wait for us to die. They needed to erase her while she was still drawing breath. Ray came and stood beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. The good news is that the damage appears to be reversible, he said, his tone careful and quiet. We have begun a flush protocol. As the drugs clear her system, the fog should lift. She will come back to you, Walter, but it will be hard. She will remember things. The fear, the confusion, the betrayal. I turned back to face him. Document everything, Ray. I want photographs of every bruise, every lab result certified. A formal medical opinion on record stating that her mental condition was chemically induced, not natural. "I have already begun," he said. "This file goes into my personal safe. No one accesses it but you." I looked back at Dorothea's closed door. She is not just my wife, Ray. She is the only truly good thing I have ever made in my life, and they broke her. They broke her for money. I returned to the chair and lifted the toxicology report from the folder. I folded it with care and slid it into my inside breast pocket right against my chest. It felt heavy there like a stone resting over my heart. "Thank you, Ray," I said. "Keep her safe. No visitors. Not even if they claim to be family. Especially if they claim to be family." He nodded. "Security is already posted." I walked out of the office and into the corridor. The hospital air was cool, but my skin ran hot. I checked my phone. 12 missed calls from Claudia. They wanted to play games. They wanted to convince the world that my wife had lost her mind so they could cage her and empty everything I had built. They thought they were operating against a feeble old truck driver and his confused, helpless wife. They did not understand that they had just delivered into my hands the single weapon that would take them apart. I did not return to Dorothea's room right away. I needed a moment. I set my back against the cold corridor wall and shut my eyes. I saw Preston's face. I saw him folding those pills into her food. I saw him laughing about the crazy maid. I breathed in, slowly, antiseptic floor wax. The grief had burned away. The shock was gone. What remained was a clarity as sharp and hard as a diamond. I took out my phone and called my daughter. It was time to let her lie to me one final time. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. Every ring felt like a shovel striking earth. I stood in the hospital corridor staring at a vending machine without registering it, gripping the phone until the casing pressed into my palm. "Hello?" Claudia's voice was small and tight, not the voice of a grown woman. It was the voice of a frightened child trying to cover a broken vase. "Claudia," I said, "I am at the hospital with your mother." A pause, a long, weighted silence in which I heard her breath catch. And then, instead of asking how her mother was, instead of asking whether Dorothea was all right, she whispered, "Dad, you have to bring her back. Preston he is destroying the house. He is throwing things. He says you kidnapped her." I closed my eyes. The disappointment settled on my tongue like ash. "I did not kidnap her, Claudia," I said, my voice level and cold. "I rescued her. Dr. Henley has just completed his examination. He found the drugs." "What drugs?" she asked, but the feigned ignorance was thin, and it cracked the instant it left her mouth. "The antipsychotics," I said. "The sedatives. The poison you and your husband have been putting into her food for months to keep her manageable. To make her appear unstable so you could justify locking her in the basement." "Dad, stop!" she hissed. "You do not understand. She was difficult. She was wandering the house at night. She was breaking Preston's things. He said she needed something to calm her. He said it was standard." "Standard?" I said, my voice lifting just enough that a passing nurse glanced over. "Starvation is standard. Bruises on her arms are standard. Sleeping on a doormat in the rain is standard." I waited for the denial. I waited for her to cry out, that she had not known, that she had been blind to it, that she was devastated. I prayed to a God I had not spoken to in years, that my daughter had simply been a victim living under a tyrant's roof. She did not deny it. She justified it. "He is under enormous pressure, Dad," she sobbed. "Yeah, the promotion, the new investors. He could not manage the stress of having her there. He needs everything to run perfectly. You know how he gets." "And you?" I asked. "You were there, Claudia. You watched him wipe his mud-covered shoes on your mother's shoulder. I saw your car in the driveway. You were inside drinking wine while she was freezing on the porch. Why didn't you open the door? Why didn't you bring her a blanket?" "I couldn't," she cried out. And the truth finally spilled ugly and raw. "He threatened me, Dad. He said that if I went against him, if I stepped in to help her, he'd cut me off. Cancel my credit cards. Take the car. I have nothing of my own, nothing at all. I couldn't take that risk." I stood there motionless. The phone felt like a block of ice against my ear. "You let him torment the woman who gave you life because you were afraid of losing your allowance." I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You traded your mother's dignity for a leased Range Rover and a pair of shoes. I have to go." She panicked, her voice falling to a terrified whisper. "I hear his car. Dad. Please just bring her home. Don't set him off. If this deal falls apart because of you, he will take it out on me." "Claudia," I said. "What, do not call me Dad again." I didn't wait to hear another word. I ended the call. The silence that followed was total. I stared at the dark screen of my phone. I had walked into that hospital a father and a husband. Now I was only a husband. The daughter I had raised, the girl whose tuition I had covered, whose tears I had dried, was gone. She hadn't been taken from me. She had been purchased. She had sold herself for comfort, and the price was her mother's sanity. I slipped the phone into my pocket. A strange calm came over me. The calm of a man with nothing left to lose and therefore nothing left to fear. I had identified the enemy. It wasn't Preston alone. It was the greed that had crept through my family like a sickness. I turned back toward Dorothea's room. My steps were heavy, but my resolve was iron. I had cut the rot out of my heart. Now it was time to cut them out of my life. And unlike them, I wouldn't need poison or lies. I had something far more powerful. I had the truth, and I had the receipt for everything they owned. The offices of Crane and Associates occupied the 45th floor of a glass tower in the Loop, a steel and glass fortress that looked down on the city like a silent judge. It was well past midnight, and the cleaning crews had long since vacuumed the carpets and emptied the bins, leaving the corridors quiet and dim. But in the corner office, the lights burned bright. I sat across from Alfred Crane, my attorney for 30 years, and the man who knew where every single one of my bodies was buried, metaphorically speaking. Alfred was a man of few words, and even fewer smiles. He wore his three-piece suits like armor and wielded his pen like a blade. Tonight, his desk was buried under a mountain of paper: bank statements, trust deeds, loan agreements, and surveillance reports. Alfred didn't look up when I came in. He simply slid a thick binder across the mahogany desk toward me. It landed with a heavy, ominous thud. "You wanted to know how deep the rot went," he said, his voice gravelly from too much coffee and too little sleep. "Well, here is the biopsy. It is terminal, Walter." I sat down and opened the binder. The first page was a summary of the trust fund I had established for Claudia and Preston 5 years ago. It was designed to cover the maintenance of the Lake Forest estate property taxes and a modest stipend for living expenses. It also included an emergency medical fund of $500,000 earmarked solely for catastrophic health needs. I turned the page to the transaction log. My eyes moved down the columns of figures, and my blood ran cold. 3 months ago, a withdrawal of $200,000 from the medical fund. The reason listed urgent surgical procedure for Dorothea Beaumont. I looked up at Alfred. Dorothea didn't have surgery 3 months ago. She was still recovering from her hip replacement, which I had paid for out of my own pocket before I left for Europe. Alfred nodded grimly. "I know. Look at the signature authorizing the withdrawal." I looked more closely. It was a scrawl that vaguely resembled Dorothea's handwriting, but the loops were too wide, the pressure too uneven. It was a forgery. A clumsy, desperate forgery. "He forged her name," I whispered. "He stole my wife's identity to rob her blind." "Keep reading," Alfred said. I turned to the next section. It showed where the money went. Not to a hospital, not to any doctor. It went to a luxury car dealership in suburban Milwaukee. A wire transfer of $180,000 for a Porsche 911 GT3. The remaining $20,000 was spent at a high-end jewelry store and a five-star resort in the Caribbean. He bought a sports car with funds meant to save my wife's life. I said, the fury rising in my chest, like a pressure cooker. He is driving around in a stolen car while she sleeps on a doormat. "It gets worse," Alfred said, drawing another document from a separate stack. "This is the deed to the Lake Forest house. As you know, the house is held inside the trust. Preston and Claudia are merely tenants with a lifetime lease contingent on their conduct and adherence to the trust's terms. The title is not theirs." I nodded. I had set it up that way to shield them from their own worst instincts. "Well," Alfred continued, "apparently Preston never read the fine print or simply didn't care. 6 months ago, he approached a private lending firm, one of those predatory outfits that charge usurious rates. He used the house as collateral for a massive business loan. How I asked, he doesn't hold the title. He forged a quitclaim deed," Alfred explained, sliding a copy of the fraudulent document toward me. "He transferred the title out of the trust and into his own name, using a fake notary stamp and your forged signature. Then he leveraged the property to borrow $1.5 million. $1.5 million. I stared at the figure. "What did he do with it?" "He invested it." Alfred said, his tone thick with disdain. "In a cryptocurrency venture that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. The venture collapsed 2 weeks ago. The money is gone, Walter. All of it. And now the lenders are calling in the loan. They are threatening to foreclose on the house." I leaned back in my chair, staggered by the sheer scale of the stupidity and greed. Preston hadn't simply stolen a car. He had effectively stolen the house I bought for my daughter, gambled it away on magic beans, and lost. He was sitting atop a ticking time bomb, throwing parties and wiping his shoes on my wife, while the creditors were literally at the gate. "So he is broke," I said. "He is worse than broke," Alfred corrected. "He is insolvent. Underwater on the car, the house is about to be seized, and he owes creditors nearly $2 million. If the board at Global Tech learns their CFO is carrying this kind of debt, they will fire him for cause without hesitation. He is a security risk, and he believes he is about to be named CEO." I said, a dark laugh escaping my lips. "He is desperate, Walter. That is why he was treating Dorothea that way. That is why he was trying to drug her and lock her away. He needed her out of the picture so he could potentially reach her personal accounts or her life insurance. He is a drowning man trying to climb on top of the one person who cannot fight back." I closed the binder. The anger was still there, but it had transformed. It had crystallized into something cold and hard and razor-sharp. I wasn't simply furious anymore. I was ready to execute. "Alfred," I said, "I want you to buy the debt." Alfred blinked. "Which debt?" "All of it. The car loan, the predatory mortgage, the credit cards. Track down every single person he owes and buy the paper. Use the shell company Obsidian Holdings. Pay whatever they ask. I want to be the only creditor Preston answers to in this world." Alfred smiled. It was a terrifying sight. "You want to foreclose on him yourself?" "No. I said, rising from my chair and crossing to the window. Foreclosure takes too long. I want to hold the note. I want to own the paper that proves he is a fraud. When I walk into that party on Saturday, I don't want to simply throw him out. I want to strip him bare. I want his bosses, his investors, and my daughter to see exactly what he is. I turn back to Alfred. Prepare the eviction notice. Draw up the civil suit for fraud and elder abuse, and draft a criminal complaint covering the forgery and the theft. Have everything ready to file Monday morning. But for Saturday, I just want the deeds. I want the loan agreements. I want the proof that everything he touches turns to ruin. Consider it done, Alfred said, already typing at his keyboard. By Friday afternoon, you will own him. And Alfred? Yes, pull up the contact information for the current CEO of Global Tech, Gordon Ashby. I need to have a word with him about his employees' performance review. Alfred nodded. He is playing golf at your club tomorrow morning. I can arrange a tea time. Perfect. I walked out of the office and into the silent corridor. The city lights glittered below me, a million pinpricks in a concrete sky. Preston thought he was a player. He thought he could lie, cheat, and steal his way to the top. He believed he could hurt my wife and walk away clean because we were old and weak. He was about to learn the most fundamental lesson of business. Never leverage what you don't own, and never underestimate the silent partner. I pressed the elevator button. The doors parted with a soft chime. I stepped inside and watched the numbers descend. 45, 44, 43, going down Preston, going all the way down. The silence in the hotel suite was heavy, not with tension, but with the weight of waiting. I had switched off my phone 3 days ago, cutting the only digital lifeline connecting me to the parasite living in my house. It sat on the marble desk like a black brick, a mute testament to my refusal to play his game. I knew men like Preston. I knew that silence to a narcissist is worse than any insult. It is a vacuum they feel driven to fill with their own noise, their own fears, and eventually their own arrogance. Dorothea was resting color, gradually returning to her cheeks on account of real food and the absence of whatever poison they had been slipping her. I sat by the window, watching rain trace lines down the glass, picturing the scene back in Lake Forest. I could see Preston pacing the floors of my house, checking his phone every 5 minutes, his fury slowly boiling over into panic, before hardening into a smug, delusional certainty. I finally reached over and powered the device on. It buzzed against the mahogany wood, a frantic and angry insect flickering back to life. The notifications cascaded down the screen in a flood of abuse. 57 text messages, 20 voicemails. It was a portrait of a man coming apart. I scrolled to the start and read them in order. Tuesday morning opened with irritation. Where the hell are you? You need to bring her back. The investors are asking questions. By Tuesday afternoon, the irritation had curdled into threats. If you don't answer me in 10 minutes, I am canceling the health insurance policy. I hope you have deep pockets, Walter, because her meds aren't cheap. You are going to kill her with your stubbornness. I let out a short, dry laugh. He believed he held the purse strings. He had no idea the insurance was paid directly by the trust he had tried to loot. He was threatening to cut a cord he didn't even hold. Wednesday brought the legal bluster. I spoke to my lawyer. What you are doing is kidnapping. Taking a vulnerable, mentally incompetent adult without guardian consent is a felony. Bring her back or I am calling the police. Do you want to die in prison, old man? I almost wanted him to make that call. I had the toxicology report from Dr. Henley in my pocket. I had photographs of the bruises. If the police showed up, Preston wouldn't be pressing charges. He would be wearing handcuffs, but I knew he wouldn't follow through. Men like him thrived in the dark. He had no interest in authorities poking around the house where he kept his mother-in-law on a mat. He only wanted to frighten me into submission. By Thursday, the tone shifted again. The threats stopped. The panic dissolved. In its place was a terrifying, unearned arrogance. He had read my silence not as strategy, but as cowardice. He thought I had fled. He thought I was cowering in some cheap motel, too broke and too frightened to face him. Fine Thursday night's message read, "Don't come back. We are better off without you leeches. I changed the locks this morning. I told security that if they spot your old truck, they are to trespass you immediately. Enjoy the homeless shelter. And don't worry about the house. I will take good care of it now that it is finally mine. Finally mine." He truly believed it. Believed. He thought he had won. He thought he had flushed us out like rats. He was probably moving through the rooms right now, measuring walls for new art, and planning his victory lap at the party on Saturday. He had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath his feet had already been sold out from under him. I looked over at Dorothea. She was awake, watching me with clear and steady eyes. The haze of the drugs was lifting, uncovering the steel spine I had fallen in love with 40 years ago. "Is he still barking?" she asked softly. "He thinks we ran away," I said. "He thinks he scared us off." "Good," she said, smoothing the duvet cover. "Let him think he is the king of the castle. It will make the fall that much harder." I typed out a single reply. I had no interest in arguing. I didn't want to tip my hand. I simply needed to make sure he didn't cancel the party. I needed an audience for what was coming. "We will be there Saturday," I typed, "so we will not be a burden anymore." It was the truth, just not in the way he understood it. We wouldn't be a burden because we would be the owners. I hit send, watched the delivery receipt tick over, and switched the phone off again. The trap was set. The bait was taken. All that remained was to wait for the music to start. The next 48 hours were not spent resting. They were spent forging a weapon, and that weapon was my wife. The withdrawal from the antipsychotics was brutal. For the first day, Dorothea shook so hard she could barely grip a cup. She sweat through the high thread count sheets of the hotel bed, murmuring about the cold, about the basement, about shadows gathering in the corners. I sat beside her, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead, whispering that she was safe, that the monsters were gone, that the only thing ahead of her now was justice. By Friday morning, the fever broke. The fog that had smothered her mind for months finally lifted. I watched it happen in real time. I was reading a newspaper by the window when she sat up. The terrified, darting eyes of a trapped animal were gone. She looked at me, and her gaze was steady. It was the gaze of the woman who had helped me build a logistics empire from a single flatbed truck. "I remember everything, Walt," she said, her voice raspy but firm. I remember him laughing at me. I remember Claudia turning up the volume on the television so she wouldn't hear me crying at the door. I set down the paper. "We are going to fix it, tomorrow night." She nodded, swinging her legs out of bed. Her steps were still careful, but she stood tall. "I do not want to walk back in there looking like a victim," she said. "I do not want them to see a frail old woman they can pity or dismiss. I want to walk into that house looking like the person who holds the mortgage." I smiled. "I have already arranged for that." At noon, a team arrived at the suite. I hadn't hired a local salon. I hired the crew that prepares models for Vogue covers. They set up lights and mirrors in the living room. Dorothea settled into the chair, and I watched them go to work. It wasn't about vanity. It was about reconstruction. They dyed her graying, matted hair a rich and vibrant chestnut, shaping it into a sharp, elegant bob that framed her face with authority. They worked creams and serums into her skin, erasing the gray pallor of malnutrition and replacing it with a healthy glow. The makeup artist, a young man who worked in silence, paused when he noticed the yellowing bruise on her cheekbone. He glanced at me, then at Dorothea. He asked no questions. He simply reached for a palette and blended the mark away until her skin looked flawless. When Dorothea looked in the mirror 3 hours later, the broken woman was gone. The confused, diminished figure they had made of her was gone. Staring back was a matriarch. She looked 10 years younger and 100 times more dangerous. Then came the clothes. I had called in a favor from a personal shopper at Neiman Marcus, Chicago. They sent a rack of gowns to the suite, each one zipped into a black garment bag like a secret. What he was about to uncover, the full weight of what had been done in the shadows, right under his nose, would demand a reckoning none of them were prepared for. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you discovered that someone close to you had been quietly betraying your trust for years, would you confront them immediately, or would you take your time and make absolutely certain the net had no gaps? Dorothea had no interest in florals. Pastels were out of the question. What she chose instead was a floor-length gown of deep sapphire velvet, hand-tailored, structured, imposing, with long sleeves that covered the bruises on her arms, and a high collar that lent her the bearing of a sovereign. The dress carried a $12,000 price tag. It said without a word, "Do not come near me." To complete the effect, I crossed to the room's safe. I retrieved a velvet box I'd pulled from my private vault earlier that morning. Inside sat a diamond and sapphire necklace set in platinum, heavy, ostentatious, and impossible to undervalue. I clasped it around her neck. Modesty is my preference in most circumstances, but this was not most circumstances. Tomorrow we needed armor. This necklace was a shield forged from light. "You look terrifying," I told her. "Good," she said, fingertips brushing the cold stones at her throat. "I want them terrified." While Dorothea was being transformed, I had my own preparations to see to. I wasn't returning to Lake Forest, Illinois as Walt the truck driver. I was going back as Walter Beaumont, chairman of Trident Holdings. I placed a call to a private security firm, one that built its reputation protecting executives in high-risk environments. Mall cops were not what I had in mind. I wanted professionals. I hired 4 men, ex-military, the large and silent variety earpieces, in the kind of men who could snap a neck without their expression flickering. "I want you at the estate by 7:00 sharp," I told the lead agent. "Hold at the gate. When my car pulls in, you flank us. Nobody lays a hand on my wife. If my son-in-law moves so much as a step in her direction, you put him on the ground. Are we clear?" "Loud and clear, Mr. Beaumont." Next came transport. An Uber wouldn't do. A town car wouldn't do either. I rang a luxury rental service that worked with diplomatic clientele. I requested a Bentley Mulsanne, black-tinted glass, the sort of vehicle that splits traffic just by appearing. I wanted Preston to hear the engine before he ever laid eyes on us. I wanted him to see that hood ornament and understand in his gut that he was outclassed. But the most consequential call came last. The final nail driven home. I settled at the desk and dialed a number I hadn't touched in 6 months. 2 rings. Walter. The voice carried genuine surprise. It was Gordon Ashby, CEO of Global Tech Solutions, the man Preston devoted every waking hour to impressing. "Hello, Gordon," I said. "I apologize for the short notice. I'm in town." "And Walter, the honor is mine. I had you pegged as still in Zurich. To what do I owe the pleasure? Is the acquisition on track?" "Everything's fine," I said. "But I have a personal matter that requires my attention. I understand you're attending a dinner party tomorrow evening in Lake Forest, Illinois, at the home of your CFO, Preston." Gordon paused. "Yes, actually. Something of a celebration." We're announcing his elevation to the board on Monday. He's been pushing for you two to meet, in fact says he's turned the finances around entirely. I let out a short, cold laugh. He has certainly done something with finances, Gordon. Now listen to me carefully. I'm coming to that dinner. You are, that's wonderful. Preston will be over the moon. I'm not coming to celebrate Gordon. I'm coming to audit. A long silence settled over the line. The warmth drained out of the conversation, instantly replaced by the chill of corporate seriousness. Audit, Gordon said, measuring every syllable. Walter, what exactly is happening? I need you there, Gordon. I need you standing in the front row. And I need you to bring termination paperwork for a C-level executive. Termination clears throat for Preston, but his numbers. His numbers are a fabrication, Gordon. The man is insolvent. He's been leveraging company assets. He's under investigation fraud and elder abuse both. And the house where he's throwing this party, it belongs to me. I'm evicting him tomorrow night. Good God, Gordon whispered. I need you to witness this, Gordon. I need the board to see precisely who they were about to hand the keys to. Can I count on you? I'll be there, Walter. Gordon said, his voice hardened to steel. And I'm bringing legal. Good. 7 o'clock. I set down the phone and moved to the mirror. I'd shaved the scruffy retirement beard. On my back was a bespoke tuxedo last worn to a gala in Vienna. I straightened my cufflinks, solid gold knots that caught the light, and threw it back. The truck driver was gone. The father was gone. What the mirror held now was the chairman, and nothing else. I walked into the living room. Dorothea stood at the window, eyes on the city below. She turned when she heard me. The sapphire velvet whispered around her feet. The diamonds burned at her throat. She looked regal. She looked powerful. She looked like a woman ready for war. Is the car ready? She asked. Waiting downstairs, I said. Then let's go, she said, lifting a small clutch from the table. I believe we have a party to crash. While Dorothea was being reshaped into a queen by a team of stylists in the master suite, I sat in the adjoining study conducting the final movement of a symphony designed to end in my son-in-law's complete destruction. I had the eviction notice. I had the civil suit. I had the toxicology report. But one piece was still missing. I needed a cage he couldn't charm his way out of. Preston was a slippery animal, I knew the breed. He was the sort of man who could look a judge dead in the eye and insist the drugs in Dorothea's system were a pharmaceutical error, a mix-up, a misunderstanding. He would swear the forged withdrawal from the trust was a loan he fully intended to repay. He'd cast himself as the victim. He'd cite the pressure of his position. He might walk away with probation and a stern look. I had no interest in probation. I wanted federal prison. I wanted a felony so undeniable, so thoroughly documented, and so flagrant that no attorney alive could make it disappear. To get there, I needed to bait a trap with the one thing Preston loved above all else, more than himself even: money. I picked up the phone and dialed a man who owed me his livelihood. Chester Chet Burwell was a retired hedge fund manager, a predator who'd patrolled the deepest, darkest corridors of Wall Street for 40 years before retreating to a vineyard in Sonoma. Ruthless, magnetic, and a world-class actor. Years back, I'd pulled his firm from a liquidity crisis that would have finished him. He'd told me at the time, "Walt, if you ever need a body buried or a bank bought, you call me." I didn't need a body buried. I needed a fish to take the hook. Saw Chet. I said when he picked up, "It's time." "I'm ready, Walt?" Chet's voice came out low and raspy, vibrating with the pleasure of the hunt. "I'm seated across the street from the coffee shop right now." He just walked in. "Looks nervous. Keeps checking his watch. Perfect, I said. Remember, he's desperate. He needs $5 million to plug his debts and buy his seat in the CEO chair. He'll agree to anything you put in front of him, but you have to get him to sign. Don't worry about that. Chet chuckled. I brought the platinum fountain pen. Adds just the right air of legitimacy to an execution. I ended the call and opened my laptop. Chet was wired. I pulled on my noise-canceling headphones and settled in to listen. I needed to hear the precise moment Preston sold his soul. Through the static, the coffee shop door chimed. A chair scraped across the floor. Mr. Burwell, Preston's voice filtered through breathless hungry. It's an honor, truly. I can't tell you what it means that you flew in on such short notice. Ma, sit down, kid. Chet said, his voice filling the room with the effortless authority of old money. I don't have long. My jet leaves Palwaukee Municipal Airport in an hour. You said you have an opportunity. Pitch me. Keep it tight. I have a violent allergy to PowerPoint presentations. I shut my eyes and pictured the scene. Preston sweating through his expensive suit, working every angle to charm a man who'd been eating CEOs for breakfast since before Preston had a driver's license. It's a fintech play. Preston shifted into his pitch, his voice sliding into that familiar, oily salesman cadence. We're calling it Ledger Lock. Blockchain-secured high-frequency trading. The algorithm is proprietary. We're projecting a 10x return in the first 6 months. All I need is seed capital to scale the infrastructure. $5 million buys you 30% equity. He was lying. There was no ledger lock. It was vaporware a shell company erected to launder the money he was hoping to steal. Chet let him run for 2 minutes. Then he cut him off with an unhurried sigh. Kid, stop, Chet said. I don't care about the technology. I've got people in Silicon Valley who handle the tech. What I invest in is people. And frankly, you look like a man who's running out of runway. Silence. I could hear Preston swallow. I don't know what you mean, sir. Don't insult my intelligence. Chet's voice cracked like a whip. I ran a background check. You're leveraged to the hilt. Creditors are circling. You're hungry. I like hungry. Hungry men take chances. But hungry men also make catastrophic errors. I have some temporary liquidity issues, Preston stammered. Just a cash flow timing situation. Once the bonus lands, I don't care about your bonus. Chet cut him off. I'm prepared to write you a check for $5 million. Today. Right now. I heard Preston's sharp intake of breath. $5 million, yes, but I don't do unsecured lending. I require collateral, real collateral, not some phantom algorithm. Collateral. Preston's voice wavered. Assets, kid. Hard assets. Real estate. Word is you're sitting on a very fine estate out in Lake Forest, Illinois. Prime location. Market value somewhere north of $6 million. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This was the moment. The pivot point. Yes, Preston said fast. Yes, the house. It's magnificent. Is it yours? Chet asked. The question was a razor blade tucked inside a bouquet. Yes, Preston lied. No hesitation. No stutter. Yes, mine, free and clear. 100%. Good, Chet said. Then we have ourselves a deal. I have the paperwork right here, a standard bridge loan agreement. You pledge the deed to the Lake Forest, Illinois estate as collateral against the $5 million. Company succeeds, you pay me back with interest. Company fails, I take the house. Paper shuffled in the background. I just need your signature here, Chet said. And I need you to execute this affidavit declaring you're the sole legal owner of the property with full authority to pledge it. This was the teeth of the trap. Telling a lie in casual conversation was one thing. Signing a legal instrument pledging property you didn't own to secure financing, that was bank fraud and wire fraud. A federal offense carrying up to 30 years. I held my breath. Held perfectly still. Would he actually do it? Would greed bulldoze his instinct for self-preservation? He knew the house was held in trust. He knew he was nothing more than a tenant. But he also knew $5 million would make every problem disappear overnight. It would retire the Porsche, wipe the debts clean, and leave him flush enough to keep playing the big shot. All he had to do was gamble that he could pay Chet back before anyone pulled the deed. I own it, Preston said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. It was a gift from my wife's parents. They're out of the picture now. Stay out of the picture. A wave of cold hatred rolled through me so hard my vision flickered white at the edges. He assumed we were dead or neutralized. He was selling my home, my legacy, banking on the belief that I was too broken to fight back. Then sign, Chet said. The scratch of pen across paper came through my headphones loud and clear. It sounded like a zipper being drawn shut over a body bag. There, Preston said, his voice shaking with adrenaline. Signed, Chet laughed, full-throated, expansive. Welcome to the big leagues, kid. My office wires the funds first thing Monday morning. Enjoy the party tonight. I hear it's going to be quite the occasion. You heard about the party? I hear everything, kid. Now go on. I've got a plane to catch. The chair scraped. Preston's footsteps moved away, quick, light, buoyant. He was probably walking on air. In his mind, he'd just engineered the deal of a lifetime. He believed himself $5 million richer. The door chimed. Chet's voice came through the earpiece, low and steady. It's done, Walt. I'm here, Chet. Documents in my hand, he said. Notarized by my associate at the next table. He pledged the deed. He signed the affidavit of ownership. It's over. Thank you, Chet. He's going to jail, Walt, Chet said quietly. Lottie, this document, it's a smoking gun. He just defrauded a private equity firm. The FBI will eat him alive. That's the plan, I said. I'll scan it and push it to your secure server inside 5 minutes. Give him hell tonight. I lifted the headphones off and set them down. I sat in the stillness of the hotel room. It was done. Preston was no longer just a rotten son-in-law. He was a felon. He had strolled into a coffee shop, a free man, and strolled out a federal target. I checked the clock. 5:01 p.m. The party kicked off at 7:00. I rose and moved to the window. The sun was going down over the city, throwing long shadows between the buildings. I felt a strange, calm detachment. The anger had burned itself out. What was left was something simpler. I was simply inevitable. Preston had spent years raising a house of cards. He had deceived his wife, preyed on his in-laws, looted his employer, and now defrauded an investor. He thought he was constructing a tower to the heavens. He never understood he was just stacking kindling for a bonfire. And I was the one holding the match. I walked into the bedroom. Dorothea stood before the full-length mirror. She turned when she heard me. The sapphire velvet fell in clean lines around her frame, giving her the silhouette of a warrior queen. The diamonds at her throat caught the last light of the sun and threw it back in cold sparks. Is it time? She asked. I nodded, straightening my cufflinks. He signed, I said. He tried to sell the house. She didn't look surprised. She looked resolved. Then let's go take it back, she said. We walked out of the suite together, two ghosts returning from the grave to haunt the man who had dug it. We rode the elevator down to the lobby where the Bentley Mulsanne sat waiting. The driver held the door open. I helped Dorothea inside, making sure her gown cleared the sill. As the car swung away from the curb and pointed toward the highway and Lake Forest, Illinois, I pulled out my phone. One last message to send. I opened the contact for Alfred Crane. He signed, I typed, "File the criminal complaint. Forward the digital copy of the fraud affidavit to Gordon Ashby's phone right now. I want him reading it before we cross the threshold." I hit send. The trap had sprung. The cage door was shut. All that remained was to flip on the lights and let the world see the rat I had caught. The Bentley Mulsanne rolled silently up the long winding drive, gravel murmuring softly under tires that cost more than most people's yearly wages. Through the tinted glass, I watched the estate burn against the dark sky. It looked like something from a fairy tale, a castle draped in golden light. Every architectural detail I had paid for was thrown into relief by floodlights placed just so. It was a beautiful house. A house built for a family to age in together, to share meals in, to fill with the weight of real memories. Instead, it had become a stage, and the man performing on it was wearing a borrowed skin. We stopped just shy of the light pooling beneath the portico. I told the driver to cut the engine but leave us dark. I wanted a moment to look. I wanted to see the court of the Crimson King before the walls came down. The front doors stood wide open, pouring light and noise into the cool evening air. Guests moved through the foyer and into the great room beyond, men in bespoke suits, women in gowns that caught the light like liquid metal. The power set of Lake Forest, Illinois board members from global tech investors, Preston had been wooing with my money and his lies. I lowered my window an inch. Applause drifted out. Preston was mid-speech. I gestured to Dorothea. We stepped out of the car into the shadows, moving without a sound toward the open doors. The security team I'd retained was already positioned around the perimeter, invisible sentinels, waiting on my word. We stopped just outside the entrance, tucked behind the massive stone pillars flanking the doorway. From there, we had a clean sightline to the center of the room. Preston stood on the grand staircase, elevated above his guests like a monarch holding court. A crystal champagne flute in one hand, the other resting casually on the mahogany banister. He looked flushed, triumphant. He looked like a man who believed he had just pocketed $5 million and a CEO title in the same afternoon. Success. Preston was saying, his voice smooth and carrying over the hushed crowd, isn't simply about the figures on a balance sheet. It's about character. It's about the resilience to keep driving forward when the world tries to grind you down. When I look around this room, I see partners who understand what vision really means. I see the future of global tech. A wave of polite applause moved through the room. Preston soaked it in, lifting his champagne to his lips, before his face shifted into something studied and sorrowful. He was reaching for the sympathy card. I'd watched him play it a dozen times, but never with stakes anywhere near this high. But success carries a price. He went on, his voice sliding down into a register of manufactured humility. You all know that Claudia and I have been through considerable personal difficulties this week. It's no secret that we've spent years caring for her elderly parents. We opened this home to them. We gave them a refuge here on this estate because we believe that family looks after family, whatever the cost. I felt Dorothea go rigid beside me. I laid my hand over hers, where it rested on my arm, feeling the cold fire of her diamonds against my palm. My father-in-law, Walter, was a simple man. Preston continued, shaking his head with a sigh that had been rehearsed to the last beat. A truck driver his entire working life. He never understood this world. He never grasped the pressure, the responsibility. And my mother-in-law, poor Dorothea. Her mind has been slipping for some time. We tried everything. We brought in the finest doctors. We converted the guest cottage into a proper facility outfitted for her comfort. Lies. Every syllable was a poisoned lie. He had converted the guest cottage into a storage room and put her on a mat to sleep. But dementia is a merciless thief, Preston said, dropping his gaze to Claudia, who stood at the foot of the staircase staring at the floor, a wine glass clenched in her hand, like something to hold on to. She looked washed out, diminished, utterly defeated. She knew every word was false, and yet she stood there and let him drag our names through the mud. This week their paranoia overwhelmed them. Preston lied, his voice thick with manufactured grief. They became agitated, disoriented. They refused any help we tried to offer, and 3 days ago they ran. They slipped away in the night because they could no longer accept the care we were working so hard to provide. We've retained private investigators to locate them naturally. We're covering all costs ourselves because we simply want them safe. We want to bring them back to the facility where they can get the help they truly need. A murmur of sympathy moved through the crowd. Near the door, I heard a woman breathe. "He's such a saint. I don't know how he does it." "It breaks my heart," Preston said, pressing a hand flat against his chest. "To give someone everything, to give them dignity and comfort, only to have them turn away because they are too far gone to understand what you're offering them. But that is the burden of leadership, isn't it? We carry the weight for those who cannot carry it themselves. We make the hard calls. We protect the vulnerable, even when they resist the protection." He raised his glass. "So tonight, don't drink only to global tech. Drink to resilience. Drink to the sacrifices we make in the dark, so that we can stand here in the light. To family, and to the future which belongs to those bold enough to seize it." "Hear, hear!" The room cheered. Glasses rang together. Preston beamed and drank deeply, savoring the flavor of his own deception. He believed he was untouchable. He believed he had woven a story so seamless that no one would ever lift the edge of the rug to see what had been swept underneath. He lowered his flute and looked down at Claudia. She produced a weak smile, raising her glass to him in a toast that looked more like a surrender. I glanced at Dorothea. Her eyes were dry but burning with a ferocity that could level buildings. She no longer looked frail. She no longer looked confused. She looked like an executioner standing over a freshly sharpened blade. "He thinks we're gone," she murmured, her voice low and even. "He thinks we're ghosts." I straightened my cufflinks, feeling the full gravity of the moment settle across my shoulders. "Then let's show him what a real haunting looks like," I said. I gave the signal to the security team. The lead agent dipped his head and moved, shoving the heavy oak doors open until they struck the stops with a boom that rang through the foyer like a cannon. The chatter cut off instantly. The clinking of glasses went silent. Every face in the room swung toward the entrance. Preston froze on the staircase, his glass suspended halfway to his mouth, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. But the irritation dissolved the instant his eyes landed on us. We stood framed in the open doorway, the cool night curling around us. I was in my tuxedo, standing straight, the true master of the house come to reclaim what was his. And beside me, Dorothea blazed in sapphire velvet and diamonds, a queen risen from the wreckage of what he had done to her. The silence was total. It was the silence of a breath caught and held. It was the silence of a lie breaking apart into fragments. I took one step forward. My dress shoe struck the marble and the sound rang out like a gavel coming down. Hello, Preston," I said, my voice carrying to the far wall without effort. "I believe you were just talking about us." The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense and suffocating, drawing the air out of the room the way a vacuum does. It was the sound of 100 carefully tended lies shattering at once against something immovable and real. Preston stared. His mouth hung partly open, a portrait of shock. The crystal flute tipped in his grip, a single drop of expensive champagne, hitting his polished shoe, though he didn't register it. He couldn't. His mind was trying to reconcile two images it could not hold at the same time. The image of the broken, dirty old man he'd pushed out into the rain 3 days ago, and the figure of the Titan standing before him now. I stepped fully under the chandelier's light. The custom tuxedo sat on me like armor. The silk lapels caught the glow, the solid gold cufflinks gleaming at my wrists. I stood straight, the stoop of the weary truck driver I had worn as a disguise completely gone shed like an old coat. But I was only the frame. Dorothea was the masterpiece. She stepped in alongside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. The sapphire velvet fell around her like water, its depth making her skin look like fine porcelain. Her hair, no longer gray and tangled, was a rich chestnut crown around her face. And the diamonds. God, the diamonds. The necklace I had carried out of the vault blazed in the light, a constellation of cold fire at her throat that pulled every eye in the room. A gasp moved through the crowd. It started near the door and rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. These were people who understood money. They understood quality. They could read the cut of the dress, the clarity of the stones, the unmistakable aura of real wealth radiating from where we stood. Is that her? A woman near the front whispered. The maid. She doesn't look like a maid, a man muttered back. She looks like a queen. We began to move. We didn't hurry. We walked with the slow, deliberate pace of predators who already know their prey has no way out. The security team held the perimeter, silent figures in black suits, their presence lending an air of menacing authority to our entrance. The guests gave way without thinking. They stepped back, pressing toward the walls, opening a wide corridor that led straight to the base of the grand staircase, where Preston and Claudia stood frozen in place. I read the faces as we passed: confusion, awe. And in the eyes of the global tech board members, something else: recognition spreading across their expressions like a slow-motion collision. They looked at me, then at each other, the truth assembling itself piece by piece. Claudia was the first to break. She made a small, strangled sound and brought her hand up to her mouth. She looked at her mother. She looked at the woman she had watched sleep on a doormat. The woman she had allowed to be drugged and starved. She saw the steadiness in Dorothea's eyes, the clarity, and she seemed to fold inward. She tried to step behind Preston, but there was nowhere to go. "Mom," she whispered the word, shaking in the stillness. Dorothea didn't look at her. She kept her gaze fixed on Preston. We came to a stop in the center of the room, 10 ft from the foot of the stairs. I could see the sweat gathering on Preston's forehead. I could see the pulse hammering in his throat. His eyes moved to the Bentley Mulsanne sitting visible through the open doors behind us. They moved to the security guards. They moved to the diamonds. And Walter. He rasped his voice, a hollow remnant of the commanding baritone he'd been projecting minutes before. What is this? Where did you get those clothes? Did you rent them? Is this some kind of sick joke? He was scrambling for the controls. He was trying to reframe this as the desperate theater of a deranged old man, but the conviction wasn't there. His voice trembled with fear. The smile that crossed my face held no warmth whatsoever. No joke, Preston. I said, my voice carrying cleanly to the far end of the room. Just a correction. You seem to be under the impression that my wife and I were destitute, that we were helpless, that we were, what was the word you used? Leeches. I took a step toward him. He stepped back, nearly stumbling over the stair riser. I thought I'd come set the record straight in person, I went on. And since you were kind enough to invite the entire board of directors of Global Tech, it seemed like the ideal moment to introduce myself properly. I turned my head, letting my gaze settle on Gordon Ashby, who stood near the fireplace holding an untouched glass of scotch. He looked pale, but he gave me a firm, respectful nod. Preston caught it. He saw his boss, the CEO he practically worshipped, dipping his head toward his own father-in-law. The color left Preston's face entirely, washing him gray. I turned back to him. You see, Preston, you made a mistake. You judged the book by its cover. You saw a man behind the wheel of a truck and decided he must be poor. You saw a woman who loved her garden and decided she must be weak. And from those assumptions you figured you could hurt us, that you could steal from us, that you could wipe us out. I reached into my tuxedo pocket. The sound of rustling fabric was sharp in the silence. Preston flinched. He actually flinched, as if he expected a weapon. Instead, I drew out a folded document. The affidavit he'd signed in that coffee shop 3 days prior. But you forgot the first rule of finance, Preston, I said, holding the paper where everyone could see it. Always know who holds the note. Preston's eyes locked onto the document. He knew exactly what it was. I watched the precise moment his spirit abandoned him. You signed this, didn't you? I asked, keeping my voice low. You pledged this house as collateral against a $5 million loan. A house you do not own. A house that belongs to a trust. He stammered, his eyes sweeping the room, hunting for an ally, for someone to laugh and tell him this was some elaborate nightmare. Nobody laughed. The investors were watching him with flat, predatory stillness. They could smell blood in the water. And do you know who controls that trust, Preston? I asked. I do. I let those 2 words sit in the air. I let him work through the arithmetic. If I controlled the trust, I controlled the house. If I controlled the house, I controlled him. Claudia began to cry. It was a thin, high sound, like a kettle reaching full boil. Dad, please, she wept. Don't do this. Not here. Not with everyone watching. I looked at her then. I looked at my daughter. You had your chance, Claudia, I said, all pity drained from my voice. You had a chance when she was shivering on that porch. You had a chance when he was drugging her food. You picked your side. Now you carry that. I turned back to face the room and raised my voice to address the guests, the board members, the elite of Lake Forest. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, I apologize for the disruption. My son-in-law was just speaking to you about the future of global tech, about character, about resilience. I gestured toward Preston, who was now visibly trembling, one hand gripping the banister for support. But there is something you ought to know before you raise a glass to his success. I looked at Gordon Ashby. Gordon, I said, would you mind stepping forward? The crowd parted. Gordon Ashby walked toward us. He didn't spare Preston a glance. He looked at me. Mr. Beaumont, he said, clearing his throat and extending his hand. I shook it. Mr. Ashby, I replied. I believe you have some paperwork for your CFO. Preston made a sound like a wounded animal. Mr. Beaumont, he whispered. You know him. Gordon turned to Preston. His expression was a mask of professional contempt. Preston, he said flatly, allow me to introduce you to Walter Beaumont, chairman of Trident Holdings, our parent company. Preston's knees buckled. He sat down hard on the stairs and buried his face in his hands. He owns Global Tech Preston. Gordon pressed on without mercy. He owns the company. He signs your paychecks. And tonight, I stepped forward until my shadow fell across Preston's hunched form. Tonight, I am here to fire you. The gasp from the crowd was unmistakable. Dorothea squeezed my arm. I glanced at her. She was smiling, not a happy smile. The smile of justice itself. But we are not simply firing you. Preston, I said, leaning down so only he and the nearest row could hear. We are evicting you. I drew a second document from my pocket, the eviction notice Alfred had drafted, and let it drop onto his lap. It landed with a soft slap. Get out of my house, I said. The document settled across Preston's legs like something lifeless. His hands were trembling so badly he couldn't even grip it. The eviction notice. The end of his reign. But I wasn't finished. The eviction was merely the opening act. The main event hadn't started yet. I turned away from him, left him slumped there on the stairs, and moved toward the small stage where a jazz trio had been playing earlier. The musicians had gone still, instruments lowered, watching everything unfold with wide, unblinking eyes. I reached over and lifted the microphone from its stand. Testing, I said. My voice rolled through the speakers and filled every corner of that enormous room. I looked out across the sea of faces. These were the people Preston had performed for, the people he had tried to dazzle with, borrowed wealth and stolen stories. You know, I began, my tone easy but carrying an edge beneath it. My son-in-law has a very particular definition of family. He told you earlier that family takes care of family, that he was practically a saint for opening his home to his poor, confused in-laws. I let the silence stretch a moment. I looked directly at a woman in the front row who had both hands wrapped around her pearls. But he left out a few details. He forgot to mention that the sanctuary he provided was an unheated storage shed. He forgot to mention that the care he provided included drugging my wife with antipsychotics to manufacture the appearance of dementia. And he most certainly forgot to mention that the money behind this party, his suits, his leased cars, none of it came from his salary. It came from looting his mother-in-law's retirement savings. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Preston lurched, trying to get to his feet, but his legs refused to hold him. "That's a lie!" he screamed, his voice splitting. "He's out of his mind. Don't listen to him. He's senile." I smiled. The smile of a man sitting on 4 aces. Senile, I said. That's a curious diagnosis, Preston, particularly from a man who just put his name on a federal affidavit pledging property he doesn't own to secure a fraudulent loan. I reached into my pocket and produced another document, the affidavit from the coffee shop. I held it up so the whole room could see. This is a sworn notarized statement signed 3 days ago in which Preston declares himself the sole owner of this estate and used it to attempt to borrow $5 million from a private equity firm. I crossed to where Gordon Ashby stood. "Gordon," I said, "you're a businessman. What do you call it when an executive leverages assets he doesn't control to cover personal debts?" Gordon took the microphone from me. His face was stone. "We call it embezzlement," he said. "And we call it fraud." He turned to face the crowd. "For those of you who may not know," he continued, his voice carrying the full weight of authority, "I am Gordon Ashby, CEO of Global Tech Solutions. And the man beside me is not simply a truck driver." He gestured toward me. "This is Walter Beaumont, founder and chairman of Trident Holdings. Trident acquired Global Tech 6 months ago, which means..." He turned and looked at Preston, who was now clinging to the banister the way a drowning man clings to wreckage. Which means, Preston, that Walt isn't merely your father-in-law. He is your boss. He owns the company you work for. He owns the building your office sits in. He owns the chair beneath you. The weight of it hit Preston like something physical. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened and closed without producing a sound. Every trace of arrogance, every scrap of smug superiority dissolved on the spot, replaced by pure, naked terror. "You," he stammered. "You can't be. You drive a truck. You wear flannel." I laughed. It came out hard. I drive a truck because I enjoy the open road, Preston. I wear faded canvas work shirts because they suit me. But don't confuse a man's habits with his balance sheet. I built an empire while you were still figuring out how to knot your tie. I have sat across tables from unions, from cartels, from governments. Did you really think a small-time thief like you could get the better of me? I walked back toward him and leaned down until my face was level with his. "You called us leeches," I said quietly. "You said we were a burden. You wiped your shoes on my wife. And the whole time you were living under my roof, spending my money, drawing a paycheck from my company. So tell me, Preston, who is the leech, who is the parasite?" He shrank away, making a soft, broken sound. "I didn't know," he sobbed. "I swear I didn't know. If I had known, if you had known I was wealthy, you would have treated me with respect," I said. "Is that it? You only extend basic human decency to people with a large enough bank account. That is the problem, Preston. That is why you are finished. Not because you stole, but because you are cruel. You are a small, cruel man who thought he had found a victim. Instead, he found a judge." I straightened up and looked at Gordon. "Gordon, I think it's time for that performance review." Gordon nodded. He reached into his jacket and drew out a sleek black envelope, then climbed the stairs and stopped one step below Preston. "Chief Preston," he said, his tone formal and final. "Effective immediately, your employment with Global Tech is terminated for cause. We have uncovered significant financial irregularities in your department. Unauthorized transfers, falsified expense reports, company funds used to cover personal gambling debts." Gambling debts. Claudia shrieked from the foot of the stairs, staring at her husband in horror. "You told me you were investing." "I was," Preston shouted back, desperation cracking his voice. "It was a sure thing. I just needed more time." Gordon ignored the outburst entirely. "Security is already clearing out your office, Preston. Your company accounts are frozen, and our legal team has forwarded its findings to the district attorney. You are facing charges of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and securities fraud." He held the envelope out to Preston. Preston didn't take it. It dropped to the floor and came to rest beside the eviction notice. "Now get out," Gordon said, but the evening wasn't finished. I had one more piece to play. I looked toward the back of the room. Alfred Crane was standing there, briefcase in hand. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, "there is one more matter to address. My son-in-law appears to believe this house belongs to him. He appears to believe he has rights within these walls." I waved Alfred forward. "This is Alfred Crane, my attorney. Alfred, would you please explain the current legal standing of this property?" Alfred moved to the center of the room. He had no need of a microphone. His voice carried with the unhurried precision of a man who had spent decades in courtrooms. "The property is held in a blind trust," Alfred stated. "The trust agreement contains a morality clause. It specifies that tenancy is contingent upon the residents maintaining a standard of ethical conduct and providing adequate care for any family members residing on the premises. He opened his briefcase and lifted out a stack of photographs, holding them up for the room to see. They were the photographs Dr. Henley had taken. The bruising on Dorothea's arms, the bed sores, the malnutrition. Based on evidence of severe elder abuse, neglect, and chemical assault gathered by medical professionals, Alford continued. The trust has invoked its immediate termination clause. Preston and Claudia are hereby evicted. They are trespassing as of this moment. He turned to the security team I had brought in. Gentlemen, please escort the trespassers from the property. Preston lurched to his feet and bolted for the stairs, heading for the bedroom, maybe to barricade himself in or to find something he could use. But the security guards moved faster. Two of them cut across the floor in a blur of dark suits and seized him by both arms before he had taken 3 steps. No, no, you can't do this. This is my house. I'm the CFO. I matter. You are nothing, I said, my voice rising over his. You are a fraud, and you are done. They hauled him down the stairs. He kicked and screamed the way a child does in the grip of a tantrum. His tuxedo jacket tore at the seam. His shoes scraped across the marble he had always spoken of as though it belonged to him. Claudia came running toward me. She grabbed my arm with both hands. Dad, stop them. He's my husband. You can't let them throw him out. Where are we supposed to go? I looked down at her hands on my sleeve. I removed them gently, but without hesitation. You can go wherever you like, Claudia, I said. But you cannot stay here. Dad, please, I didn't do anything. It was all him. You watched, I said. You watched him wipe his shoes on her. You watched him drug her. You watched him starve her. And you did nothing because you wanted the car. You wanted the lifestyle. I pointed toward the door. You made your choice. You chose the money. Well, the money is gone. And so is your father. She recoiled as though I had struck her. She turned to Dorothea. Mom, she whispered. Mom, please help me. Dorothea looked at her daughter. Her eyes were full of sorrow but entirely dry. I helped you for 30 years, Claudia, she said softly. I gave you everything I had, and you made me a doormat. Goodbye. The guards pulled Preston toward the door. He was sobbing now, pleading with Gordon for another chance, begging me for mercy. I watched him go. I watched the man who had made my wife's life a nightmare get dragged out like the refuse he was. And then just as they crossed the threshold, blue and red lights strobed through the open door, washing across the rain-slicked driveway. I smiled. Alford had timed it to the second. The police aren't here for the eviction, I said to the hushed room. They're here for the felonies. 2 uniformed officers stepped from the patrol cars. They met the security guards on the porch. Words were exchanged. The handcuffs came out. Preston screamed as the cold metal snapped around his wrists. It was a sound I knew I would carry with me happily for the rest of my days. I turned back to my guests. They were watching me with a blend of fear and wonder. Please, I said, straightening my cuffs. Don't let any of this spoil your evening. The bar is still open, and unlike my son-in-law, I can actually afford the champagne. I signaled the band. Play something cheerful, I said. We have a great deal to celebrate. The music rose tentative at first, then fuller, warmer, and I walked to Dorothea. I took her hand. We did it, she whispered. We did it, I said. And for the first time in a long while, the house felt clean. The room was still reeling from the revelation of who I was. But I understood human nature. Even with the eviction notice lying on the floor and his own boss having just fired him, There were people in that room, investors, hangers-on, sycophants, who were quietly wondering whether Preston was simply the victim of a vindictive billionaire father-in-law. They needed to see the monster for themselves. They needed to see what this man was behind closed doors when the cocktail parties were over and no one was keeping score. I looked at Alfred. Not a word passed between us. He simply plugged a small silver flash drive into the laptop, connected to the large projection screen behind the stage, the same screen Preston had planned to use for his triumph that evening. The Global Tech logo disappeared. The room went dark for a heartbeat, and then a grainy black and white image shuddered to life. Security camera footage, exterior, front door. The timestamp read Tuesday, 11:42 p.m. A collective silence settled over the crowd as the image came into focus. On the screen, a frail woman in a torn gray uniform was curled up on the welcome mat in the rain. It was Dorothea. The footage had no sound, but the image screamed everything. Then the front door swung open. Preston stepped out in his tuxedo. The guests watched in horrified silence as the man on the screen laughed, exchanged something with his companions, and then deliberately, almost lazily, raised his muddy dress shoe and dragged it across my wife's shoulder. A woman somewhere in the crowd let out a short, sharp cry of pure disgust. The footage cut to the next clip. The kitchen. Dorothea was seated at the small corner table eating from a plastic container. Preston walked in. He knocked the container clean out of her hands. Food scattered across the floor. He pointed at the mess, then pointed at the floor, his face contorted with contempt. And on that screen, my wife, the same woman who had just walked into this room wearing diamonds, lowered herself to her hands and knees and began picking food off the linoleum. "Turn it off!" Preston screamed from the bottom of the stairs, straining against the guards. "That's fake, it's AI. He doctored it." But no one was looking at him. Every face in the room was fixed on the screen, tight with nausea and fury. The final clip began. The living room. Claudia on the sofa, phone in hand, a glass of wine nearby. In the background, Preston was shoving Dorothea toward the basement door. Dorothea was crying, one hand reaching out toward her daughter. Claudia never looked up. She took a sip of wine and kept scrolling. The screen went dark. The lights came up. The mood in the room had moved beyond shock into something rawer, a heavy, dangerous anger you could almost touch. These were wealthy people, powerful people, but they were human beings. They had mothers, they had grandmothers, and they had just watched a man they had accepted as a peer brutalize an elderly woman as though it were sport. Alfred stepped forward again. He didn't address the crowd. His eyes went straight to Preston. He opened a red legal folder. "Preston Havelock," he announced, his voice cutting cleanly through the murmuring. "In addition to the immediate eviction from these premises, I am serving you with a writ of attachment." He raised a sheaf of documents. "My client, Walter Beaumont, through his holding company, Obsidian, has purchased all outstanding debts registered in your name. This includes the $180,000 loan for the Porsche you acquired with stolen funds. It includes the $400,000 in credit card debt you have run up across 6 different banks. And it includes the personal loans you took out against your future bonuses." Alfred paused, letting the weight of that financial noose draw tight. "You are currently in default on every account. As the sole creditor, Mr. Beaumont is exercising his right to seize all collateral immediately. The car is gone. Your personal accounts are frozen. The watch on your wrist that belongs to us. The suit on your back that belongs to us. You are leaving this house with nothing but your skin, and frankly, if we could repossess that, we would." Preston sagged in the grip of the guards. He was hyperventilating, his eyes sweeping the room for a way out, for someone to save him. There were no saviors here, only witnesses. But we are not done, I said, moving to the microphone one final time. I told you, Preston, you forgot the first rule. Never sign what you don't own. Through the open front door, the night erupted in red and blue. The sirens, which had been a low hum in the distance, surged into a deafening roar right there in the driveway. The guests recoiled. This isn't local security, I said. This is the consequence of your ambition. 6 agents in FBI windbreakers pushed through the entrance. They didn't pause to ask questions. They knew exactly who they were there for. They moved through the crowd with swift, terrifying precision. The lead agent called out sharply, "Preston Havelock!" Preston actually tried to shake loose from the private security guards and make a break for the kitchen door. It was a desperate, pathetic scramble. The FBI agents brought him down before he covered 3 feet. They drove him face first onto the marble floor. You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse, the agent recited, wrenching Preston's arms behind his back. We have a sworn affidavit signed by you pledging assets you do not own to a federal informant. You have the right to remain silent. I watched them haul him upright. His nose was bleeding, his tuxedo was torn. He fixed his eyes on me, wild with terror. Walter, please, I'm family. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had starved my wife. I have no family in this room, I said. They pulled him through the door, his screams swallowed by the night as they pushed him into the back of a federal vehicle. Silence settled over the room again. The only sound was soft sobbing from the foot of the stairs. Claudia. She had collapsed to the floor when the video showed her ignoring her mother's cries. Now she was alone. Her husband was gone. The house was gone. Her reputation had been reduced to ash. She looked up at me. Her mascara had run in black streaks down her face. She looked like something shattered. She crawled toward me across the floor, fingers reaching for the hem of my trousers. "Dad," she choked. "Daddy, please. I didn't know he signed those papers. I didn't know about the fraud. I'm innocent. Please don't let them take me. I have nowhere to go." I looked down at her. I saw the little girl I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the teenager I had driven to college. But then I thought of that dark screen behind me and what it had shown her with a glass of wine while her mother was shoved toward the basement door. "You are not innocent, Claudia," I said quietly. "You are the worst kind of guilty. You are the bystander who profited from the pain." "But I'm your daughter," she wailed, clutching my leg. "You can't leave me with nothing. I'm destitute. They froze the accounts." I stepped back, pulling free from her grip. "You liked that maid's uniform so much," I said, my voice hard as diamond. "You liked watching your mother work like a servant. You thought it was funny. You thought it was order." I reached into my pocket and produced a card. Not a credit card. A business card for a cleaning service in the city. "If you need money, Claudia, I suggest you learn to scrub a floor. I understand they are hiring. And don't trouble yourself about references. I will tell them exactly how well you have always watched other people work." She stared at the card. She stared at me. "Dad," she whispered. "The trust is dissolved, Claudia. The inheritance is gone. You are on your own." I turned my back on her. I walked to Dorothea, who stood watching her daughter with eyes that were sorrowful but dry. She didn't move toward her. She offered no comfort. She understood, as I did, that comfort now would only invite the poison back. "Come on, Dot," I said, offering her my arm. "Let's go home. Not this house. Our home." We walked out the front door, past the weeping woman on the floor, past the stunned guests, past the flickering police lights. We got into the Bentley Mulsanne. The door closed, sealing out the noise, the crying, and the wreckage. As the car moved down the drive, I took my wife's hand. It was warm. It was steady. And for the first time in months, I knew we were finally free. 6 months ago, I was a man standing in the rain, watching everything I had built come apart, while music played on the other side of a closed door. Today, I am sitting on a porch that smells of salt and cedar, watching the water roll in off Lake Michigan against the bluffs of Door County, Wisconsin. The only sounds are the rhythm of the waves and the quiet humming of a woman who has found her voice again. Dorothea is down in the garden. She is wearing a sun hat and gardening gloves, kneeling in the soil, planting lavender. She isn't wearing diamonds today. She isn't in a couture gown. She is wearing jeans and a linen shirt, and to me she has never looked more beautiful. The bruising that once mapped her arms like a constellation of suffering is gone, dissolved into bad memory. The hollows in her cheeks have filled back in. Her skin, once gray and paper-thin from malnutrition and fear, is now warm with sun and bright with health. But the most important change isn't physical. It is in her eyes. The fog has lifted. The chemical twilight they forced her into is gone entirely. She doesn't flinch when a door slams. She doesn't apologize for taking up space. She doesn't ask for permission to eat. She is Dorothea again, the woman who will argue politics with me over breakfast and beat me at gin rummy after dinner. She is sharp, she is funny, and she is mine. We sold the Lake Forest estate 3 days after the party. I had no desire to set foot in it again. The structure was beautiful, but what had happened inside had poisoned the foundation. I had Alfred liquidate everything, furniture, fixtures, all of it. I didn't want a single piece that Preston had laid his hands on. We took the proceeds and bought this place. It is not a mansion. No grand staircase, no ballroom. It is a 4-bedroom shingle-style house on a bluff above the water. The floorboards creak, and the fireplace smokes a little when the wind turns. But it has something the other house never possessed. It has a soul. We wake when we feel like waking. We eat what we please. We don't conceal our money, but we don't wave it around either. We simply live. That sounds almost too plain to say. But after 40 years building an empire and 3 years enduring a war zone dressed up as a family home, plainness feels like the greatest luxury there is. I watched Dorothea straighten up and brush her forehead with the back of her hand. She caught me watching and lifted her arm in a wave. Walter. She called, her voice clear and strong against the breeze. The soil here is perfect. We are going to have blooms by July. I waved back. I thought of the night she whispered to me, terrified, that they had locked her in the basement for breaking a vase. I remembered the fear in her voice. Now she was coaxing the earth to grow, certain she would be here to watch it happen. That is what money is truly for. Not Porsches or status symbols. It is for purchasing the space to heal. It is for raising a wall that the monsters cannot breach. We don't speak about them much. We don't discuss the trial bearing down on the calendar or the letters from prison that Alfred intercepts and burns before they ever reach us. We don't talk about Claudia. That wound has scarred over. It no longer bleeds, but it is there, a thick, numb line running through our shared history. I know Dorothea thinks about her daughter. I catch it sometimes in the evenings when the house quiets down. She'll pick up a photograph of Claudia from 20 years back, before the greed took hold, and she'll sigh. But she never reaches for the phone. She knows, just as I do, that the girl in that photograph no longer exists. She was replaced by someone else. A stranger who watched her mother suffer and chose to do nothing. We learned through the hardest lesson life offers that you cannot save people who are willing to drag you under to keep themselves afloat. I came down the steps to the garden. I took the trowel from Dorothea's hand and drew her into a hug. She smelled of lavender soap and fresh earth. She felt solid. She felt safe. "You have been out here for 3 hours," I said. "Come inside. I made lunch." She looked up and gave me a smile. A real one. Not the frightened half-grimace she used to offer Preston. "I am starving," she said. Those 3 words once broke my heart, because they used to be a plea. Now they are simply a fact. We walked back to the house hand in hand. The wind chimes stirred on the porch. The water moved below. We were 2 old people in a quiet house perched at the edge of the world. To anyone passing on the road, we looked like nothing remarkable. But we knew the truth. We were survivors. We had passed through the fire together and come out the other side still holding the only things that mattered. Our dignity, our sanity, and each other. This is what winning actually looks like. Not a victory speech before a cheering crowd, not a boardroom takeover. It is sitting at a kitchen table sharing a sandwich with your wife, knowing without any doubt that no one will ever harm her again. Justice moves more slowly than revenge, but it lands harder because it is permanent. Revenge is a burst of flame. Justice is a cage. For Preston, that cage is concrete and steel inside a federal penitentiary in downstate Illinois. The trial was a spectacle, though I didn't sit through every day of it. I didn't need to. Alfred Crane had built a case so airtight it would have suffocated Houdini. The centerpiece was the affidavit Preston had signed, pledging a house he didn't own, a textbook example of bank fraud and wire fraud stacked on top of the elder abuse evidence, the toxicology reports, the photographs of Dorothea's malnutrition, and the testimony of the security guards who had watched him drag her out of the party. No defense attorney alive could have rescued him from that. He tried the insanity plea. He tried claiming duress. He even turned on Claudia, arguing she was the real architect of it all, and that he was simply a devoted husband trying to keep things together. It was pitiful. The thrashing of a rat pinned in a trap. The judge, a woman with eyes like flint, who had clearly seen more than enough men like Preston to last several lifetimes, was unmoved. She handed down 10 years in federal prison on the fraud charges, to run consecutively with another 5 years for elder abuse and criminal endangerment. 15 years. He will be 55 when he walks out. No money, no career, and a felony record that will make sure he never sets foot in a boardroom again unless he is mopping the floor. But the prison term wasn't the only punishment. The financial destruction was total. Alfred saw to that. Since I held all his debt, I exercised my right to liquidate every asset down to the last dollar. The Porsche went to auction. The designer suits, the watches, the expensive electronics gone every piece. He arrived in prison with nothing in his commissary account. He went in as a pauper. I heard through Alfred that Preston spends his time in the prison library drafting appeals that no court will ever take seriously. He tells the other inmates he was a CEO, that he was brought down by a billionaire conspiracy. They laugh at him. In there, he isn't a shark. He is just fresh meat. He wanted to be a powerful man. Now he is just a number. Claudia's outcome was different. She avoided prison. The prosecutors concluded that her role, however morally repugnant, was largely passive. She had been complicit in the neglect, but they couldn't establish that she had signed any fraudulent loan documents. So she remained free. But freedom, I came to understand, can be its own kind of prison. I went to see her once, about 3 months after the trial closed. I didn't speak to her. I only needed to confirm for myself that the cycle had been broken. Alfred had told me she was working the register at a discount grocery store in Cicero, living in a basement studio she shared with 2 roommates. Her credit destroyed, her references non-existent. I parked across the street and watched through the storefront glass. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and drizzling. Claudia stood at the register. No designer silk. A polyester smock, 2 sizes too large, a name tag, pinned crookedly to her chest, her hair once highlighted and blown out on a weekly schedule pulled back in a messy bun showing dark roots. She looked 10 years older. She looked worn through. I watched a customer, a large man with a loud voice, begin shouting at her over an expired coupon. He jabbed a finger toward her face. He called her stupid. He called her slow. I watched my daughter flinch. I watched her pull her shoulders inward, making herself smaller, trying to disappear, the exact same posture Dorothea had learned to adopt whenever Preston raised his voice. "I'm sorry, sir." I saw Claudia mouth. "I'll fix it. I'm sorry." She scanned items, bagged groceries, wiped down the conveyor belt. She was doing the work she had spent years looking down on. She was serving people she once would have walked past without a glance. Then the man did something that stopped my breath. He knocked a carton of milk across the counter. White liquid spread around the register. "Look what you made me do!" he shouted. "Clean it up." Claudia didn't argue. She didn't call for a manager. She seized a roll of paper towels and bent over the counter, her hands moving in quick, anxious circles. Some of the milk ran off the edge and dripped onto her shoes, cheap canvas sneakers already gray with grime. She wiped her shoe with a rag, her head down, shoulders rounded in submission. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. She had permitted her husband to treat her own mother as a maid, to wipe his shoes on her, to reduce her to something disposable, and now the universe had dressed Claudia in that same uniform. She was the one cleaning up the mess. She was the one being humiliated for a minimum wage paycheck that barely covered her share of the rent. She looked up then through the plate glass of the storefront window. For a moment our eyes met across the street. I saw the recognition strike her. I watched the shame flood her face and turn it crimson. She took a small step toward the window, one hand rising slightly, a reflex, a silent appeal. "Dad." I could almost hear her whisper it. She wanted me to walk in. She wanted me to rescue her. She wanted me to buy the store, dismiss the rude customer, and restore her to the comfortable world she had betrayed us to keep. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't lift a hand. I simply held her gaze, acknowledging what her life had become. And then I raised the window of the car. I told the driver to go. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate demands energy. Hate requires a living connection. What I felt was nothing but a distant, cold pity. She was living the life she had made for herself. She was learning hour by hour and dollar by dollar what it feels like to have no power. She was discovering the worth of the dignity she had sold for so little. She sends letters to the house by the water sometimes. Alfred passes them along, but I don't open them. I know what they contain. Requests for money. Apologies dressed up as needs. But I am finished being a resource. I am finished being a bank. Claudia is not my daughter anymore. She is a stranger who happens to share a face with someone I once knew. And as I watched that grocery store shrink in the rearview mirror, I understood that leaving her there scrubbing spilled milk off a counter was the most truthful thing I had ever done for her. She was finally constructing a life with her own 2 hands. A hard life, a small life, but one that belonged to her. And that was justice. The sun is going down over the water, spreading gold and violet across the surface, in shades that no amount of money could ever purchase. Dorothea is settled in the rocking chair beside me, knitting a scarf, humming a song I haven't heard in years. She glances up and smiles, and in that smile, I see the only empire that ever truly counted. I think about Preston and Claudia still not with anger, not anymore, but with a kind of cool, detached curiosity, the way you study a thing that burned itself out. They were the architects of their own collapse, yet they blamed the ground for shifting when the structure fell. They made the fatal error so many arrogant people make. They read kindness as weakness. They read silence as stupidity. They looked at a man in a faded canvas workshirt and saw a mark, never understanding that the man in the faded canvas workshirt held the deed to the ground beneath their feet. They forgot that the person behind the wheel of the truck is the one who controls where it goes and how hard it stops. I spent 40 years on the road. I learned that you respect the heavy machinery. You respect the weather. You respect the distance. Preston and Claudia respected nothing. They drove through life running red lights, cutting corners, leaving damage behind them, convinced the toll would never come. But the toll always comes due. There is a lesson buried in all of this one that cost my family everything before we understood it. It is a lesson about the dangerous illusion of appearances. A tailored suit does not make a man honest. A title does not make a man a leader. And a fat bank account does not make a man deserving of respect. Real power is not about berating waitstaff or wiping your shoes on people you've decided are beneath you. Real power is the capacity to protect the ones you love. It is the ability to stand in the rain, dismissed and humiliated, and know quietly, absolutely, that you could bring the whole structure down the moment you chose to. I chose to bring it down because they hurt Dorothea. That was their sin. If they had only taken the money, I might have let it go. I might have cut them off and walked away without a word. But they went after her spirit. They set out to erase her dignity. And for that, there is no forgiveness. There is only the cold, hard correction of reality. I reach over and take Dorothea's hand. Her skin is warm. Her pulse is steady. We are survivors of a war neither of us started, but we are the ones who ended it. Do not ever let anyone tell you that you are less than them because of what you wear or what you drive. Do not let anyone treat you like something they can wipe their feet on. And if they try, remember, you do not need to raise your voice. You do not need to throw a punch. Sometimes you only need to wait for the right moment to turn on the lights and show them exactly who has been standing in the room all along. My name is Walter Beaumont. I am a truck driver. I am a billionaire. And I am the man who showed his family the true price of greed. Thank you for staying with me all the way through. This one wasn't easy to tell, and I imagine it wasn't easy for all of you to hear. Looking back at everything, Walter and Dorothea endured the deliberate cruelty, the stolen dignity, the years of careful silence. Before the moment of reckoning, what strikes me most is how much it cost them simply to survive inside their own family. I believe God has a way of restoring what was taken not always on our schedule, but completely when the time is right. What they lost in suffering, they reclaimed in peace. And the price of that peace taught all of us something that cannot be unlearned. Here is what I take from their story. Never mistake a quiet person for a powerless one. The most dangerous force in any room is the one that has nothing left to prove. If someone is willing to diminish another human being, to elevate themselves, that tells you everything about their character and nothing about the person they targeted. When the people you love are being harmed, patience is not weakness. Patience is the sharpest instrument you own. Use it with intention. And this dignity is not something another person can permanently take from you. They can borrow it by force for a season, but it finds its way home. If this story moved you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Someone who feels unseen or who is quietly carrying more than anyone around them knows. Leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't yet, I'd be honored to have you subscribe to Family Revenge Stories, where every story is a reminder that truth is patient and justice, however long it takes, is precise. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.